Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I have a couple special guests with us, Ashu Garg and Devon Wijesinghe. Today's webinar is on the welcome to the decade of the CMO, the future of marketing technology landscape and the new CMO. My name is Gina Mueller, and I just want to go through a few housekeeping items with you all before I hand off controls to Ashu and to Devon. So the first note is that today's webinar will be recorded. So I will be following up with an email probably sometime tomorrow with the recording if for any reason you want to share it with a friend or if you have to cut off early. We have shared a few handouts with you. So if you look on the right-hand side of the control panel, you will see there's some handouts. I encourage you guys to take a look at some of those. If you have any questions during today's panel, you can ask them at any time in the GoToWebinar control panel under questions, or we urge you to use the hashtag of today's webinar, which is hashtag #ModernCMO, and we will be taking questions on Twitter as well, and we will be addressing and answering all those questions at the end of today's webinar. So thank you for all coming. I'm really excited to kick things off, and I will kick things off by handing it over to Devon to do some intros.
Hey, thanks, Gina, and thanks all of you for joining us today. I think this is a really amazing topic, and we're thrilled to have Ashu with us because, as everybody continues to talk about the rise of the data-driven marketing department and the kind of madmen to mathmen, a lot of these analogies are actually coming from certain places, and I think Ashu has done a great job of actually being bold and stating that there's going to be a 10x increase in marketing tech spend in 10 years. And so this is an opportunity to get, real details around this sector, and can be just an amazing opportunity for you to learn, and we obviously will have Q&A directly with them. So, I think my favorite image was when everybody thinks of venture capitalists, many times they may think of people that are lording over spreadsheets and, just dealing in high finance. I think my best image is Ashu on a conference call on July 4th while he's grilling. So I think that's the real life of a VC. So feel free to ask direct and operational related questions today. So I'd love to just go ahead and hand it off to Ashu, and we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Devon, and thank you, Gina, for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about the thesis around the decade of the CMO, and we'll try to cover this mostly from the vantage point of marketers, but also to the extent there are folks who are sort of, in other parts of the ecosystem, whether it's startups or otherwise, happy to address questions as well. But first, very quickly, let me do my quick infomercial about Foundation Capital and introduce myself. I am one of the general partners at the firm. I focus a lot on marketing technology, but in addition to that, also do work across SaaS, analytics, and sort of the B2B stack more broadly. I'm on the board of TubeMogul, Localytics, Conviva, more recently Yozio and ZeroStack, so a host of companies across the space. Switching gears to Foundation, we've had a successful history of investing in the sector that goes back to '99 when we made our first investment in the sector in a company called Responsys, and that really came out of the work we were doing at Netflix, one of our very early investments, where they were spending more than half of their engineering resources on building marketing technology in-house. We said, hey, that doesn't make sense. There should be companies doing this, and that led to Responsys. Since then, we've invested in TeaLeaf, MarkMonitor, Freewheel, Aggregate Knowledge, all of which have exited and cumulatively accounted for over $3 billion in market cap. We're in our active portfolio, we're the lead investors in TubeMogul, Adro, InsideView, Conviva, Localytics, Yozio, and Castora. So a very broad portfolio in this space. And I could brag on each of these companies for a long time, but in aggregate, I would say, we definitely have deep investments in the sector, and a lot of what you're talking about, a lot of what we're going to talk about today really comes from that vantage point. Let me dive right in. At the highest level, I would say this is the decade of the CMO. Every decade in the last few decades has been characterized by a corporate executive who was driving the CEO's agenda and as a result drove technology spending. In the 80s, the CFOs rolled the roost. In the 90s, it was the VPs of sales. In the 2000s, it was really CIOs who were all powerful. They were consolidating the stack, they were driving efficiencies, and that was really the decade of the CIO. This, we believe, is the decade of the CMO. I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. Gartner recently did a survey when they asked over 400 CEOs which 5 technology-enabled capabilities will be the most important areas of investment to improve your business over the rest of this decade. And the top 3 answers were digital marketing, e-commerce, and customer experience management. But if you think about these, while these are technology areas, these are also really all areas where the CMO is the driving force. And you're seeing this change also in terms of how CEOs perceive the role of CMOs. In fact, there was another Gartner study that said that CEOs think that CMOs are as important as CIOs in driving the overall corporate digital initiative. And, Gartner has often been quoted for a study where they forecast that within the course of this decade, CMOs will spend more money than CIOs in technology. So anyway, in aggregate, as a result of all of these sort of mega trends, which really make this the decade of the CMO, we believe that technology spending by CMOs will increase tenfold in this decade and is an over $100 billion opportunity. And over the course of the rest of this material, I'll talk about what's driving this trend, because that's the more interesting part for all of us. What are the changes in buyer behavior that are driving this tectonic shift? It really boils down to 4 aspects of the change in buyer behavior. And each of these at some level are obvious to this group. And we're all living this every day. That said, I think we still underestimate the cumulative impact of these changes. I'll use an example. For example, how many of you know that chewing gum sales have fell dramatically in 2014? I'm talking about gum stick sales. Anyone have a point of view on why that would have happened? Well, let's think about it. Where is gum sold? It's sold in the checkout aisle of supermarkets. And what are people doing these days when they're checking out in a supermarket? In the past, they were looking at the checkout aisle, picking up a magazine, picking up a stick of gum, or maybe some candy. Instead, what they're doing is they're bending down, focused on their phone. We're all looking at our phones while we check out. As a result, people don't buy gum stick anymore. And so the fact that chewing gum sales could fall by more than 10% because of mobile is something that you couldn't have imagined even a couple of years ago. And so that, I think, is a great example of just of the mega shift that's underway. But let me talk about this in a little more detail and break this down into 4 specific aspects of buyer behavior. The first is really the change in terms of the explosion in media choices, both in terms of the number of media channels as well as the number of devices. 10 years ago, when I watched TV, I listened to the radio, but today we all watch on-demand videos, whether it's on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, Vessel, and I could go on and on. We read the news via Twitter and Flipboard, and we listen to music on Pandora, Spotify, and a dozen other choices. And so think about what that means in the expansion of sort of channels through which we all, as marketers, have to communicate with our prospective customers. The second change is in terms of how we talk to brands. We as consumers talk to brands and how we expect brands to talk to us as consumers. In the past, when I had a bad experience as a consumer with the United Airlines, I could probably write to the Small Business Bureau, write to some regulator. I could call 1-800 United Airlines and be on the phone for an hour. Today, as consumers, we don't do that anymore. I tweet, I blog, I post on Facebook. And as a consumer, I have an outsized voice and an increased importance in that conversation. And, really, I think for marketers, and we'll talk more about this as we talk about the technology tools that you should think about, social media has become a marketing outlet where we have to drive conversations and relationships versus making open-ended or one-sided statements. The third change in the consumer behavior is how expectations that consumers have from brands have evolved. The shift that I call from a right brain to a left and right brain. I'll take an example of my own. In the past, I used Rogaine. And in the past, I would buy Rogaine simply because people told me, or the brand said, it would keep my beautiful head of hair. Well, that's kind of true. But really, today when I buy Rogaine as a consumer, in addition to catering to that vanity, Rogaine as a marketer is citing clinical trials that demonstrate hair growth. Take Guinness beer, same thing. Guinness beer for almost 100 years has said, it's good for you. That's their tagline. For most of this time, it's good for you was based on fun and entertainment. But if you look increasingly at Guinness beer ads and marketing in the last decade, they talk about clinical studies that beer reduces the risk of strokes, it reduces cardiac incidents. So more and more consumers expect this mix of appealing to the right brain, which has always been true, and now to the left brain as well. So we want both our informational needs as well as our emotional needs to be met in order to trust their brand. The fourth mega change from a consumer behavior is the process through which we all make purchase decisions. Let me use an example. 10 years ago, if I was buying a car, I would largely be influenced by their TV commercials. And then once I decided I wanted to check out an Audi car or Audi and Mercedes or some other brand, and I was in shopping mode, I would go to a dealer for a test drive. I would probably scan the newspapers, just look at what the deals are. And that was the process I followed. I bought a car recently. Me, Ashu, as just personally as a consumer. And what did I do? I read the reviews on various car sites. I checked out Kelly's Blue Book. I posted questions on Facebook and Quora to get feedback from my friends. And then I eventually ended up buying the car on BP, which is a used car marketplace. I didn't interact with Audi. I never visited one of their dealers. And as a result, the brand had no opportunity to actually influence my purchase decision in any way. Think about how challenging that is for all of us as marketers, where from going from one funnel, consumers now have infinite funnels that they create of their own and infinite paths to purchase. As a result of all of these changes in consumer behavior, software is becoming the chief means of engaging prospects and customers. And this is driving an enormous growth in technology spending by CMOs. We really do believe that CMOs will spend more than $100 billion, close to $120 billion a year on marketing technology by 2025. If you think about this, overall marketing spend in 2025 will be well over $1 trillion, well over, in fact, $1.2 trillion. And so this is really around 10% of that, as against 1% today that's spent on technology by marketers. This 10x growth in the next decade is really being driven by the changes in consumer behavior that we just talked about, and also by the shift in the mix of marketing spend from media to technology. For example, if you want to reach 20 million women today with an ad, historically, if you want to reach 20 million women with an ad, you would probably advertise on, pick your favorite TV show. A long time ago, it used to be Desperate Housewives, more recently Scandal. And so you bought access to the audience through content and context. And so content that had a particular demographic skew was very valuable. And as a result, the vast amount of the value was captured by the content, and technology captured a couple of points of media spend. Today, you can reach the same 18 to 49 female demographic by buying ads across a variety of niche shows, or buying ads across NCIS, because you know what? 10% of the people who watch NCIS happen to be in that demographic. In that case, you're probably going to use a combination of TubeMogul and Freewheel and companies like that enable you to do targeted buying of video and TV. In this scenario, tech companies capture 20 to 30% of the overall marketing spend. And you see this shift where value has shifted from context to technology. So that's the mega theme, I think, that's underway. The question I think we're all asking is, what does this mean in terms of what's the roadmap as a marketer? How should we think about where to spend our technology dollars so as marketers we're all well positioned for this tech-enabled future? Well, we're marketers too, so we have a framework. My partners and I joke behind every marketer is a great framework, and so why don't we walk you through our framework of what technology spending, what marketers will spend on technology. We really think about this as the 5 keys. And it is our belief that these 5 broad themes are all crucial to unlocking the decade of the CMO. And as marketers, if you get these right, this will enable you to realize the opportunity and make this your decade. Now, the relative value of these themes will vary by company. The relative priorities will vary. And like any framework, these are not mutually exclusive. And so there are technology companies, Insightpool, I think, is a great example of them, that are playing to multiple themes. But with that context, let me walk you through these, starting with the first one, which is ROI is king, or all hail King ROI. First, countless studies have shown that the ability to measure marketing ROI is at the top of the CMO's agenda. In a perfect world, marketers will live in an environment where they can understand the ROI for every dollar spent, for every campaign across channels, with the ability to double-click and see what ad format, what media, and what audience segment is performing. And then over time, really to be able to predict that if they were to spend $1 here, what's the return from a sales standpoint, and when that you get that return. And then once you've decided to spend $1, how do you spend that dollar? What do you spend it on? I mean, this nirvana, this dream isn't a new one. I think what's changed is that technology is now increasingly making this possible. In that, as a CMO or a marketing executive, if you want a seat on the big boys' table, I think this is part of the table stakes. Like any of these, pillars or keys, there's lots of challenges associated with this. Measuring ROI is a really tough problem. I'll take an example. I, as a consumer, want to buy a pair of Nike shoes. I search in Google for Nike kids shoes. I then see an ad on Facebook for Nike shoes. And maybe a day later, I'll see a YouTube clip that Nike has created. Eventually, I then may go and buy this pair of shoes in a physical Nike store. And so as a marketer, we're all scratching our heads and thinking, which of these interactions drove me, Ashu, to make the decision to buy the shoe? And by the way, how do I actually connect that purchase with all the interactions I had over the preceding days? And so people are trying to sort of unify identity. They're trying to attribute revenue to specific actions. They're trying to bridge the gap between these online and offline experiences. Second, CMOs want to buy and sell media programmatically. As we all know, the vast amount of media is bought and sold through human interactions in an RFP process. We all see that computers are starting to increasingly become a part of this, and material parts of media are being bought and sold using media buying platforms. I believe that over the coming decade, the vast majority of all media, 80-90%, across TV, print, billboards, will all be bought and sold through exchanges that are akin to stock exchanges. I believe the shift to programmatic is inevitable, but it comes with its challenges. Think about this. If I were to buy media programmatically as a marketer at a large brand, I'm worried that my ad will show up next to a story about ISIS and it'll tarnish my brand. Today, it's also not possible to buy media, a large part of TV, programmatically. I also want to do it in advance. I want predictability of the audience that I will reach, and most media buying is for spot buys today. But all of these challenges are being addressed through technology. And over the coming decade, as I said, the shift to programmatic isn't a fad. It's a takeover. All media will truly be bought programmatically. The third key is the idea of publish or perish. As a marketer, if I'm going to engage in a conversation with buyers who have infinitely different paths to purchase, brands then need to provide content across all of these channels, whether it's the website or it's YouTube or it's Twitter or it's some other sort of point of interaction that consumers have. And brands that do this well, they actually have the potential to build what I call friend, philosopher, guide-like relationships with their customers and therefore acquire loyal advocates. But building this kind of trust requires a massive shift in how we think about the role of marketing. And I think increasingly CMOs will have to think about how do they build media shops, content creation shops, how do they build newsrooms inside their organizations. And that's a challenge. That truly is a challenge. And take a brand like Dove. Dove's been creating incredible content for over a decade. So they've been in the content business for a long time. But still, in a world where there's infinite media choices, Dove now has to create content for Twitter and Vine and YouTube and Facebook. And every day, and in every country, there's a new channel that's emerging. And then across all of these disparate channels, you've got to be able to target your consumers. And then you've got to be able to measure the impact or effectiveness of each of these channels and of the specific communication vehicles that you choose to use within these channels. So in some ways, the complexity of publishing is 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more than the already complex world of advertising. And we're starting to see, technology platforms, and again, I think, some of the work that Insightpool is doing around analytics and helping social distribution, both paid and unpaid, I think is very relevant here.
Yeah, I think, Ashu, you make a great point, Ashu, and I think that one of the keys is almost, because so many marketers are on the call, where people think of social as channels for just publishing, but as you described, trying to create relationships and then getting the work done by these armies of advocates and others that you can create. Have you thought about or have you seen where people have had to make a completely different shift, where the advent of social and very sincere communication mediums are very different than putting up a billboard? And have you found that marketers have made that shift yet? Or do you think we're really in the early stages where they understand they actually have to be contextually relevant down to the individual level?
I think we're in very early stages. I think you're starting to see, pockets of success. You're starting to see companies use technology platforms to build and manage groups of advocates. I think you're starting to see more personalization in the communication. But frankly, it's early days. This shift from dictation to conversation is not an easy transition for all of us as marketers to make. I mean, I'll admit I grew up in a world of dictation as a marketer. We believe that if you shouted loudly enough and often enough, you'd break through the clutter. And that's no longer true.
Mm-hmm. No, that's super helpful. Yeah. Well, feel free to continue, but I think it's a real point, because even as the advent of technologies come around, so much of usage or adoption is still dependent upon who's behind those controls and how do they think.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue to sort of the fourth key, which is around the notion of personalization. I mean, remember the movie Minority Report, where as Tom Cruise walks through a mall, all the advertisements are personalized to him. Well, this is going to be our reality and the reality of all marketers and CMOs within the decade. In fact, I was at a company yesterday where we saw something, sort of the next generation of what, Google Glass was, and it's pretty incredible. I mean, you can walk around the real world seeing both the world around you as well as a completely different virtual world simultaneously. And those blend together. And as that happens, brands will be able to deliver both a combination of implicitly and explicitly gathered data in forms that are unique to every individual. And in order to do that, as brands, we'll want to be able to act in real time because, the context matters so much. We'll want to be able to do things that every consumer feels like the experience they get is truly personalized. I mean, Devon talked about this notion of, is it really just a one-way communication that's sort of, tailored on the margin for an individual? Is it truly personalized experiences? And that personalization, I think, is really important to consumers. They want to feel like you're talking to them as an individual. But as brands, we need to do it 1,000,000 times over. And I think doing that has historically been a very challenging problem. Personalization is actually the ultimate big data problem. Think about, again, I used Dove as the example a few minutes ago. Dove isn't selling to 1 or 2 or 3 million people. They aspire to sell to billions of human beings. And to be able to personalize the experience for billions of human beings can get very expensive, especially when you add the real-time component. And then having the data to do that is very hard. And to do that in a way that protects consumer privacy is even more complex. That said, we believe that all of this is starting to come together. And again, I want to emphasize that the technology stacks for each of these themes is evolving. But it is starting to come together, and the marketers that figure out how to take advantage of the technologies that are out there, and over the course of this decade, build a platform of the future, I think truly will realize the opportunity. I'll start to wrap up by talking about the last of our themes. It's really this notion that the idea of marketing passing the baton to sales to close the deal is antiquated. Increasingly, I think CMOs will predict who will be the customers, they will find them, and then increasingly actually close the deal. I'll give you an example. We're all familiar with the freemium business model for software companies. In many of these, in these freemium models, software plays the dominant role in nurturing the relationship and getting customers to the point where they're actually users of the product. And sales acts more like an order taker when the trial period is over. Well, I believe that across product categories, marketing will increasingly play this role where they nurture the relationship to the point of getting prospects to become customers and users, and sales then really just takes the order. I joke about it. Sales will no longer be exclusively the job of sales. And I think as marketers, we have the opportunity to really sort of, play a very different role in our organizations. That said, like personalization, closing the deal is really a hard big data problem. And the privacy concerns, given that you need PII, are even a bigger deal. And so the technology stacks here are evolving, but you're definitely seeing a lot of innovation here as well. If I were to sum up, I think it's never been a better time to be a marketer. I think the marketers who seize the opportunity will be the future CMOs. And the CMOs who seize this opportunity, I think, have the potential to become CEOs. And first, I think CEOs with a little e. I say C with a little E-O, Chief Experience Officers, and over time, Chief Executive Officers. So this really is the opportunity. This is the decade of the CMO. What I've walked you through is a very quick sort of 15, 20-minute rendition of the white paper that we released earlier this year. So I'd encourage all of you to go to foundationcapital.com/decade of the CMO. Check it out. Download the white paper, give us feedback, tell us what's working, tell us what's not working, and what your vantage point is. And my Twitter handle is Ashu Garg. So if you want to tweet something, connect with me. That's a great way to do it as well.
Well, Ashu, this is leading to a lot of questions, and we have several of them. And I think one of the first ones that people ask is that, we do talk about this massive rising tide. And in many cases, a rising tide lifts a lot of boats. But in some cases, this rising tide can also swallow some ships. And if you think about, I think we've seen this on the Lumascapes and things of that nature where there seems to be congestion around the space. Can you talk a little bit about, do you think that the age of also fragmentation is here and it'll go to more consolidation? Can you talk a little bit just by virtue of what opportunities will kind of make it in your opinion, and then what are others that may be consolidated or simply go by the wayside? Because there's a lot, and it seems like a war right now.
I think, Devin, that's a great question. I think when I think of this as akin to sort of the start of the universe. The Big Bang explosion is happening, and I think we're seeing lots of ideas and lots of innovation. I do think we'll see some consolidation, but frankly, by and large, marketers are used to buying best of breed. I mean, if you go back even to the old days of media, very few marketers said, look, I'm going to consolidate all my media spend with one brand or one media channel or with one content vehicle. Marketers have, I think, always found a way to deal with the complexity of integrating different channels and communication vehicles. And I think they'll do the same for technology over time. I think the transition will be messy, but I believe there's an opportunity for half a dozen Salesforce-sized companies to be created in the marketing technology stack.
Wow, that is incredibly bold. But no, thanks for the light on that. And Gina, did you have some others from the audience?
Yeah, I'm actually going to start with one of the last questions that came in, which was when you were talking about sales evolving into marketing. So they asked, are you saying sales will evolve into marketing, or will it be a shift in the salesperson's role?
I think the line between sales and marketing is getting blurred. In fact, to clarify what I was saying, I think more and more marketing is going to take over some of the aspects of closing the deal that you associate with sales. Think about Google AdWords. Really, Google AdWords isn't sold, it's bought. If customers make the decision to buy, they decide how much to buy, pricing is decided by the system or the auction, a salesperson is an order taker. What I think increasingly both B2B and B2C companies are finding is that the buyers, whether it's individuals or in their own capacity or individuals within corporations, it's still individuals. Those individuals want to make more and more of the decision by interacting with the content, with the brand, outside their relationship with the salesperson. And who provides that interaction? It's marketing. So I think it's an opportunity for marketing.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to actually cut off the next question and ask a question to tag on to that. Is there a metric that you think marketers will be held to that's different than they are today, or that, I know at the beginning when you started talking, you were saying that they would have a lot more numbers that are associated with sales. At least today, I feel we have a lot of numbers that are sales numbers in marketing. Is there certain numbers you're thinking of that marketers are now going to be measured on, or is it just that all of sales numbers will be marketing's numbers too?
I think, I think what are the right metrics for marketing has always been a big question. And ultimately, I think there's only two metrics that matter. I think it's in a somewhat tactical way, it's what revenue did the business generate? And longer term, it's what's the aggregate value of the customer base? What is the value of the brand as you get larger? What's the value, the brand value of the entity? Or what is in some shape or form, the net present value of the aggregate customer base? There's lots of research underway to figure out how do you measure marketing and how do you put it on a balance sheet? And I think the answer is unknown. More specifically, what I will say is you're finding more and more technologies that enable marketers to associate marketing activity with revenue impact. And you see that more often than not, whether it's attribution technologies on the B2B side or on the B2C side. It's really going down the path of multi-touch that enables that. But again, I think the answer will really depend on every individual company. This is not a, let me go buy X technology and I will solve my attribution problem. It's a decade-long journey.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep, and I think the key point, one of the things that we're starting to see too, Ashu, is that people. I think one of the highlights that you had actually in your slide deck too was word of mouth, and obviously that's the area that we play in. So we actually talk about like a word of mouth metric against your competitors, similar to almost like a Nielsen rating and so forth. But I was just curious if, like, when you think of word of mouth, the tangible ways to associate that, do you think that is reviews on sites, social media traction? When you talk about word of mouth, in your presentation, are there a couple key elements that drive what you call word of mouth?
Devon, that's a great question, and I think unfortunately or fortunately, the answer is it really does depend on the business. I think depending on the nature of the product and the category, what channels you use will vary a lot. At the highest level, I think what's important is word of mouth does influence at least 50% of all purchase decisions. And equally importantly, it's really word of mouth that drives trust. And we all know that, the vast majority of consumers buy stuff from brands they trust, irrespective of the data and the analytics. That emotional trust is really important. The key that I find in word of mouth is the ability to get your advocates to share their stories. Because consumers trust, obviously, hopefully you're establishing trust with the stories you tell, but the stories that other consumers, and I'm using the word consumer loosely, it applies to both B2B and B2C, the stories that consumers tell is what really drives trust. And so I would encourage every marketer to say, what are the channels on which my customers want to interact with me? What are the channels on which my customers interact with each other? And then use those channels to drive word of mouth. And if you're targeting, if you're a beauty brand today and you're targeting teenagers, well, like Instagram is number one, number two, and number three probably. On the other hand, if you're selling Rogaine, not that many Rogaine buyers are on Instagram.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Another question that came in is, what does the evolution of the marketing team look like today? Who should I hire next? What are the skills I'm looking for? And this question came around when you were talking about the mass men.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start at the highest level. All marketers need to become technologists. Marketing is a technical discipline, and if not today, it is increasingly becoming a technical discipline. So I ask every marketing person I meet in my companies, do you know how to code? And if you don't, well, you better learn or get out of the way. So I'll start there. What does that mean specifically? I think as a starting point, I look for marketers who have, skills around, at a minimum, around SQL analytics. It's an analytical and a data-driven mindset and the ability to use the tools. You don't have to be the world's expert on them, but the ability to use the tools to extract insights, I think is table stakes for marketing, or increasingly will become table stakes. I think beyond that, the largest marketing organizations are increasingly investing in building data science capabilities in-house. They're investing in building marketing technology capabilities. So, essentially a team that understands what's out there and is able to make technology choices and stitch them together. So, there's this notion that Scott Brinker has popularized of a CMTO, which I think is a thing. I think increasingly CMOs will have CMTOs in their organization who will essentially be their CIO or their IT person. So I think I would look for those capabilities.
As a Chief Marketing Technology Officer?
Yes, reporting into the CMO.
Mm-hmm.
And I think thirdly, increasingly large organizations, actually all marketing organizations, will want more control of the media buying. They may continue to own the agency, but they will want more control and more transparency and visibility. So I think understanding the media buying process and really having a deep understanding of the shift that's happening to programmatic, I think will stand marketers in good stead. And we see, at Netflix, at one of my companies, portfolio companies, we lose people to Netflix, and we're like, why is Netflix hiring people in the media buying space? But lo and behold, they have one of the largest media buying teams, programmatic media buying teams on the planet, bigger than most agencies. So I think you'll see other people do the same as well.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like we have some work to do in college and in education in general for marketers. I'm not sure that's in their marketing books.
Ashu, I think that, do you see the shift happening where, as obviously a VC, you guys, bet on things that are to come, right? And many times, traction from a customer usage and user adoption may or may not happen right away. I think of this as I was at Sirius Decisions, and they asked a question to the audience. They said, how many of you here know what predictive analytics is? And everybody raised their hand. Several, hundreds of people that were in the audience raised their hand. And then they asked a question of, how many of you are using predictive analytics in any capacity of your business today? And I think you could count on just your hands how many people had their hands up. And maybe half of them were from the salespeople that were there from those companies. But the point being is that how do you see this shift happen where it's like a hockey stick after it catches on? Or do you see this happening as this graduating process over time?
I think, there's a very famous quote by Bill Gates, which is, we all overestimate the impact of change in the short term and underestimate its impact in the long term. And I think that's very applicable here because if you think about this in the next couple of years, it is going to be it'll feel like a gradual change. It's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think the organizational implications are huge, especially as you go into larger companies. They're not growing at 20% a year. They're growing at 5 to 10% a year. So marketing budgets are growing at 5 to 10%. And so there's a skill mix change that has to happen within the organization. And that's a process. I think the agencies have outdated skills. They're not going away, but they're going to have to reinvent themselves, and that's going to take time. That said, I think if we were sitting in 2020 and we were to look back at this year, I think we will all be stunned by how much the world of marketing has changed, and it will look like a hockey stick. It will feel like a hockey stick in hindsight. But as we go through it, it's a gradual journey.
Mm-hmm. Okay, backtracking a little bit, we did have a question that came up when you were talking about the Nike example. You spoke about the challenges with ROI. What's the solution for your Nike shoe example? Is there a solution?
There absolutely is. There absolutely are multiple solutions. I think there are folks, like Drawbridge and others that are providing, using mobile-based technologies, last mile tracking. I think there are people that are doing tracking at the POS level. I think there's ways to integrate that data with your media buying. So the solutions exist. That said, they're not easy. There's no easy answer that says, buy XYZ product and your ROI problem is solved. So I think for now, they tend to be used by the most innovative and often sort of the larger organizations who have the budget to sort of invest in multiple pieces. But they're coming.
That's interesting. I think we've seen this as different examples is that when people are socially active and down to the detail, we have customers that says, well, can you track that ID and then see if it will integrate to the POS, maybe to something like Data Logics and so forth, and maybe blind the data back to me to see if they bought something, in that attribution period. And one of the questions was around where does privacy prevent innovation, or where does privacy just make us better at innovation? Can you address privacy in the aspect of the marketer today?
Yeah, I think privacy, I think the definition of what is private versus what is public is evolving very quickly. And I think it's evolving with generational shifts. What my father's generation assumed to be private information and what, millennials assume to be private information is very different. I think you see shifts, very stark differences between what Europeans consider to be appropriate privacy levels and what we consider to be appropriate privacy levels in the U.S. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer. I do think that over time, as consumers, we are going to be increasingly comfortable with sharing everything there is to know about our lives in return for a more personalized set of experiences with the world around us. And I think what, as marketers, we have to do is we have to sort of walk that path hand in hand with our customers, being transparent with them on what data we're collecting and how we're using it. And giving them the choice to opt out. But when you give them that choice, there's lots of research to show when you really give people the choice to opt out, actually a very small percentage of your customers end up opting out. On the other hand, if you don't give the choice, then it creates all the, the noise that these issues have created. So I think it's a question of managing that line between what data you collect and what value you provide, and making sure that customers feel like there's enough value. And then secondly, being transparent, and thirdly, providing the opportunity to opt out.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think the last question, and this may be one relative to you, you're speaking a lot as a marketer today, and you've obviously had those roles. Just curious, we have a question. Just how does this now play into the financing of companies? Meaning, do you see more venture capitalists wanting to get into the space, or do you see people that have already had kind of a track record investing more? Is it a combination? What do you think from an investment dollar life cycle we're seeing as we move into this? And again, if you wear the finance and VC hat that you're in today, how do you kind of see that playing out?
Yeah, so as an investor, I see an explosion of startup ideas in the space, and I definitely see an explosion of investment in the space. I don't have the data in front of me, but I had someone look at the data a few weeks ago, and, venture investments in the marketing technology arena have increased substantially over the last 5 years. So I think not by an order of magnitude, but a factor of 2 or 3. So very large amounts of venture dollars are going into marketing technology. And when that happens, I think you're seeing both existing investors step up as well as new investors come into the space. I'll speak for ourselves. As a firm, we're more active today in marketing technology than we've ever been. And we're very actively looking to identify the next generation of multi-billion-dollar companies. The trick, I would say, as an entrepreneur is to figure out how to provide enduring value. The downside of the space is marketers are willing to try a lot of things. As marketers, we're always looking for the extra 1%. And so lots of products get trials. Very few things are able to get sticky and provide enduring value. And so as an entrepreneur, I would encourage you to think about what is that business that you're building that has enduring value for marketing executives across industries and across, some customer set. And as you do that, well, as I tell people, call 1-800-ASHU-GARG.
I think you're giving everybody an insight that's who's going to be coming to Silicon Valley to pitch you, and they're going to start using your own words. So all of the entrepreneurs on the call definitely appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Well, hey, there's no sector without entrepreneurial, fervor and energy. So Devon, congratulations to you for the amazing progress you've made, and to all the entrepreneurs on the call. Look, this is just the beginning of, I think, what is going to be one of the most exciting, disruptions in technology over the coming decade. So, hang in there, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out either on Twitter or by email. So I'm Ashu Garg is my Twitter handle, ASHUGARG.
Well, Ashu, thank you so much. We really appreciate the time today. And again, I'm sure that a lot of people will follow up back with you on it. But I think the number one thing that we really appreciate is the bold statement that you're making. And, it's amazing to be able to see that, and obviously having a crystallization of that vision. So, Gina, I don't know if there's any other housekeeping items, but we can go ahead and end on that one.
There's not. We'll be following up with the recording of the webinar. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.